In this video, we're going to write a little bit of code that will handle transitions between our top-level activities. So I want to override the default Android activity transition animation and basically have our content fade in and fade out if we're switching between top-level activities. So yeah, there's not a whole lot else to say about that, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be mostly editing our base activity.java file, and then we're going to be playing a little bit with our nav drawer as well, because our nav drawer activity nav drawer item is going to actually instigate the transitions. So yeah, let's jump right in to base activity. So the first thing I'm going to do is, the way this code is going to work is our nav drawer item is going to initiate a fade out. It's going to say, we want this activity, the current activity we're on, if you click on one of the items in the nav drawer, we want the current activity that we're on to fade out. Then we want to wait for that animation to complete. Then we want to switch to the new activity. And then the new activity will tell Android to not use the default Android transition, and then the new activity will perform a fade in. So that's the sequence of events that we want to have happen. So I want to first go ahead and implement a fade out method. So I want to have there be a method inside of our base activity that you can invoke that will fade the whole activity out and set its transparency to 100% or its opacity to 0. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to say public void fade out, and I want to take in a parameter here. I want to take in a parameter that will serve as a callback to when the fade out is done. Because like I said before, when we click a button in our nav drawer, we want the activity to fade out, then we want to switch to a new activity once the fade out is finished. However, I don't want to have to do anything like try to synchronize a timer with the animation. I want the animation itself to tell us when the animation has been completed. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to introduce a callback. And the callback is, I'm just going to introduce basically just a new interface. I'm going to just write the code as if the interface exists, and then we'll implement the interface, or not implement, but declare the interface after we're done with the fade out method. Either way, it should be pretty straightforward what it does. So I'm going to say final fade out listener. So fade out listener is going to be the name of our interface. I'm declaring it final because, as you'll see in a moment, we need to use it inside of a closure. Okay, so how would we go about fading out the activity? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a reference to the root view. I'm going to say view root view equals find view by ID. Now, this is important. Watch this. Android.r.id.content. So what's this? I am not using the R from my project. So the R, as you recall, is the resource class that contains all the IDs of all the different resources. I'm using the R from Android itself, which gives us just IDs and layouts and all sorts of things that come from the actual SDK. So the ID that I'm getting a view of is the content, and the content is a special view that is basically the entirety of the window frame for our activity. So by getting a reference to this root view, I'm able to manipulate the entire parent, the topmost parent of our content view. All right, let's go ahead and animate that. So to animate it, we're going to use the very straightforward animation API. There's multiple ways to do animations in Android, and what I'm going to show you guys right here is the simplest way of doing animations. I'm going to say root view dot animate. And animate will return me a view property animator. Then I'm going to hit dot, and I'm going to set alpha to 0. Then I'm going to hit dot, and I'm going to say set listener equals new animation listener. So I typed in capital A-N, and I'm going to hit enter. Whoops, messed up there. Enter, so we get this interface being declared. And I'm going to go ahead and minimize that for now, because now I'm going to go ahead and say set duration, and I'm going to set the duration to some sort of number of milliseconds that I want it to take to fade out. Let's say 350 milliseconds. and then I'll end it by typing in start. Okay, so that's a really easy way to create an animation that fades something out. We simply invoke animate, then .alpha. We can optionally set a listener if we want to. Then we set our duration, and then we tell it to start. Now for the listener, what do I want to do here? Well, basically, I want to say on animation end, I want to say our listener. Remember the listener we have in our parameter list up here? This object right here that I expect to be an implementation of our fade out listener interface. So I'm going to say listener dot, and I will say fade out finished. Or how about, to be consistent with Java-y type things, on fade out end. All right, and that's our fade out method. Pretty straightforward. The next thing I want to do is, while we're still in the base activity, I want, before we implement our fade out listener interface, of course, or declare a fade out listener, what I want to do is I want to write code that will fade in the activity if we have a nav drawer. So the logic I'm basically saying is, if we have a nav drawer, then I want to automatically decide to disable all built-in Android animations and instead fade our activity in. So how would I go about doing that? Conveniently, we have a setNavDrawer method. So we have a method that's invoked for every one of the top-level activities. So now I just have to go in and do two things. The first thing I need to do is tell Android to not use its normal standard animation. Its normal fly-in animation. You guys have seen Android apps, right? Well, hopefully. And you know when you switch from one activity to another, it'll fly the activity in, depending on what operating system and so on you have set. Well, I want to disable that entirely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say override pending transition, and I'm going to set 0 on both the enter animation and the exit animation. So normally these could these anims can point to a special resource file for a old school animation system within Android. We're not using those at all. We're defining our animations within code. So I'm going to say override pending transition and do 0 and 0. Now we need to do our fade in. But before we do our fade in, we need to do two things. First thing is we need to get a reference to our root view. So I'm going to say view, and I'll go ahead and call this root view to be consistent with our other method. Find view by ID, android.r.id.content. Then what I'm going to do is interesting. I'm just going to say root set alpha 0. So what am I doing there? Well, basically I'm saying get the root view, get the content view, set itself to be completely transparent so we can animate it becoming untransparent or becoming opaque. Untransparent. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and write our animation. So I'm going to say root view.animate.alpha1.set duration to, let's do 150, and then say start. So when we create an activity that invokes setNavDrawer, it'll set our content view to completely transparent, and then it'll animate our content view becoming opaque. All right, the last thing I need to do is implement or declare the fade out listener interface. So at the bottom, all the way at the bottom of this class, I'm going to say public interface fade out listener, and he will have a void, what did I call that guy? On fade out. End. Derp. Face out listener. Yeah. Face out listener. That's not quite what I wanted. I wanted fade out listener. Okay, and now it's becoming and now it's being picked up that we used that before. So this is the interface that we used before, but we're now declaring it. All right, so for our animations, the last thing we have to do is jump into our views, our navDrawer class, and locate our activity navDrawer item. Then, when we click on it, I'm going to replace this to-do animations with something a little bit different. It's going to be navDrawer.activity.fadeout And then I'm going to pass in a new instantiation of a fade out listener. So I'm going to type in capital F and hit inner. So now we have this anonymous inner class that implements this interface. And then I'm going to take this code right here that we used to have, the start activity and the finish. I'm going to hit Control X to cut it, and then I'm going to paste it right here on the on fade out end. So now what happens is we only transition activities after the fade out animation has been completed. The last thing I want to do here is I just noticed navdrawer.activity is seen so many times in this method. I'm going to clean up the code a little bit by selecting this code, selecting literally navdrawer.activity. You can select any set of navdrawer.activity that you want. Right click, select refactor, and then I'm going to it's showing up off screen, but I'm going to click on extract, and then I'm going to select variable. You could have also typed in Control Alt V here. And then I'm going to say replace all 5 occurrences. And I'm going to call this, I should be able to call this activity. I wonder why it's not letting me, or it's defaulting to activity 1. Let's see what happens if I just do activity. It works just fine. All right, so basically what that did is that refactoring declared a final base activity variable and assigned navdrawer.activity to it. And then it replaced all the instances of navdrawer.activity to just activity. So we factored out that variable or factored out that expression into a variable so that our code becomes less verbose. Anyway, just a quick refactoring tool, or tip anyway. Let's go ahead and hit play and see how our transitions work, or look, rather. So we have our Android 4 and we have our Android 5. Let's go ahead and log in. Hit login, and now if I switch to another activity, so we kind of switch, and then we kind of snap into that. So we definitely have our fading out, which is nice. I might want to speed up the fading out a little bit. So let's go ahead and jump back into our base activity. I want to go ahead and change our fade out to being 300 milliseconds long. And then I think I'm also going to set the duration of our fade in to maybe 450. Let's see how that looks. I don't know if you guys can really see the animations here on the video because I'm recording at such a low frames per second. But here, let's see if this looks any better. So we come in here and we go send messages, and I think that looks a little nicer. It is skipping some frames every now and then, probably due to the fact that I'm recording this and I'm running this in a virtual machine. So if you run this in a on a real device, it should look a little smoother than what you see there. But anyway, that's basically how I want to implement animations between activities. So it's pretty straightforward. I just wanted this video here to show you guys a couple examples, some code examples of how we can use interfaces to deal with callbacks, and also an example of how we can do basic animations within code. So animating alpha inside of code and being able to fade things in and out. So yeah, I think that really pretty much wraps up our top level navigation for the application. We have all of our basic top-level activities created. We have our inbox, our contacts, our sent messages, and, of course, our profile. So I guess, yeah, we'll see you guys in the next video.